Love and regret, a story of what could have been, the beginning of forever. The first time Elena met Ryan, she was 26, fresh out of a difficult relationship, and certain that love was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. But Ryan, he was different. He had a way of making her laugh when she least expected, of seeing the parts of her that she had long buried beneath self-doubt and fear. Their love wasn't the kind that hit like a storm. It was slow and warm, like the first light of dawn after a long night. It was built on whispered promises, long drives with no destination, and the kind of quiet moments where just being together was enough. Ryan was the kind of man who made the ordinary feel extraordinary. He would surprise her with morning coffee, leave handwritten notes in the books she read, and always remind her that she was loved. Elena, in return, found herself falling in love with life again, with every small moment they shared. They married in the spring, under a canopy of cherry blossoms, their vows carried away by the breeze. Forever, Ryan had whispered against her lips, no matter what. And she believed him. For a while, forever felt real. They built a life filled with inside jokes, shared dreams, and the kind of love that made others jealous. They made plans, buying a house near the coast, traveling the world together, starting a family. Everything seemed perfect, but love, no matter how strong, is never without its cracks. The first signs of distance. The changes were small at first. A missed dinner here, a forgotten anniversary there. Ryan, who once hung on to every word she said, now seemed distracted, preoccupied with work and the stress of life. Elena tried to ignore it, blaming it on the normal wear and tear of marriage. But then came the nights he wouldn't come home until late, the sudden texts he'd hide from her, the way he turned away when she tried to reach for him in the dark. "Ryan, is something wrong?" she asked one night, her voice hesitant. He barely looked up from his phone. "Just work stress, Elena. You worry too much." She wanted to believe him, she really did. But doubt was a cruel thing. It crept into her mind, filling the empty spaces where certainty used to live. One night, she found a text message left open on his laptop. A message from someone named Sophia. Her heart pounded as she read the words, casual, playful, but laced with something more, something dangerous. "I miss you. When will I see you again?" Elena felt her stomach drop. Her fingers trembled as she shut the laptop, her mind racing. Was she overthinking? Was this just a misunderstanding? She waited for him that night, her hands clenched into fists. When he finally walked through the door past midnight, she confronted him. "Who is Sophia?" Ryan froze, the color draining from his face. It was in that moment that she knew. She wasn't imagining things. The unraveling. What followed was weeks of cold silences, bitter arguments, and broken trust. Ryan insisted that it wasn't what it looked like, that she was being paranoid. But Elena knew. She knew. She could see it in his eyes. The way he hesitated before speaking. The guilt hidden beneath his excuses. One night, as the rain poured outside, Elena sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the framed wedding picture on their nightstand. The love they had built was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to hold on anymore. Ryan wasn't the same man who had promised her forever. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the same woman who had believed in that promise. As she lay down that night, listening to the rain tapping against the window, one thought haunted her. Was love ever meant to last? Or had she been fooling herself all along? The breaking point. The morning after that stormy night, Elena awoke to an unbearable heaviness in her chest. The weight of uncertainty, of knowing that something had shifted in her marriage, settled deep within her bones. Ryan was already up, moving through the house as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't stood on the precipice of ruin just hours before. She watched him from the doorway of their bedroom, his back turned to her as he made coffee in the kitchen. There was a time when these small moments had been enough, when the sight of him going through their daily routine had filled her with warmth. But now, it felt like watching a stranger. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Ryan stiffened, his grip tightening around the handle of his mug before he slowly turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those deep blue eyes she had once trusted with everything, held something she couldn't quite place. "About what?" he asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. Elena inhaled sharply, steadying herself. "About Sophia. About us." For a moment, Ryan didn't say anything. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, with a sigh, he set down his coffee and rubbed the back of his neck. "Elena, you're making this into something it's not." Her jaw clenched. "I saw the messages, Ryan. Don't lie to me." His face paled, and in that instant, she saw the battle happening behind his eyes. The hesitation, the guilt, the need to defend himself, but also the realization that the truth was already out. "I never meant for it to go this far," he admitted after a long pause. His voice was hoarse, like he had been carrying the weight of this secret for too long. "She was just a distraction, that's all." The words cut through her like a blade. A distraction. That was all she had become to him? Something replaceable? Something he could set aside when life got too hard? The betrayal burned deep, searing through every tender memory they had built together. Elena took a step back, as if physically recoiling from him. "A distraction?" she echoed, her voice shaking. "Is that all I ever was to you?" Ryan's expression softened, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved. "No," he whispered. "You were everything." But the damage was already done. The distance between us. In the days that followed, their home became a battlefield of silent wars and unspoken accusations. Elena tried to pretend like she could forgive him, like she could look at him without seeing the shadow of another woman lingering in his gaze. But the trust was gone, replaced by something brittle and fragile. They went through the motions of a normal life, but it was all an illusion. They slept in the same bed, but miles apart. They ate dinner together, but the air was thick with words neither of them dared to say. And every time Ryan's phone buzzed, Elena felt a pang of dread that she couldn't shake. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dining table, she finally broke. "Do you love her?" Ryan looked up from his plate, startled by the question. He opened his mouth to answer, then hesitated. That hesitation was all the answer she needed. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she pushed back her chair and stood, her heart pounding in her chest. "I can't do this anymore, Ryan. I can't keep pretending." He reached for her, but she pulled away. "Elena, please." She shook her head. "Number, you made your choice, and now I'm making mine." The goodbye that was never meant to happen. The next morning, Elena packed a bag. She didn't take much, just the essentials, just enough to remind her that she was leaving behind a life she had once believed in. As she stood in the doorway, looking at the man who had once been her forever, she felt a strange sense of calm. "I hope she was worth it," she said softly. Ryan didn't reply. He just watched as she walked away, as the door closed behind her, as the life they had built crumbled to dust. Elena didn't look back. For the first time in years, she was walking towards something unknown. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The aftermath of goodbye. Elena had always imagined what it would feel like to leave, to finally step away from the man who had once meant everything to her. She thought it would be liberating, that she would walk out into the world, free from the burden of betrayal, ready to rebuild herself. But in reality, freedom felt a lot like loneliness. The first few weeks after leaving Ryan were an endless blur. She rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, filling the space with furniture she didn't love, decorating walls she never planned to stay near for long. Every morning she woke up to an empty bed, to silence so loud it rang in her ears. She thought she would find solace in solitude. Instead, she found herself reaching for her phone at odd hours, only to stop herself before she could dial the one number she knew by heart. Ryan never called, and that, more than anything, shattered her. Ryan's descent. Meanwhile, Ryan was spiraling. He hadn't expected Elena to actually leave. He had told himself she would yell, cry, throw things, but in the end, she would stay. She always had. But this time was different. This time, she was truly gone. Ryan drowned himself in distractions. He worked late, drank too much, surrounded himself with people who didn't really know him. Anything to keep from facing the reality of what he had lost. He saw Sophia a handful of times after Elena left, but the thrill that once fueled their affair had faded. Sophia wasn't Elena. She never had been. One night, after one too many drinks, Ryan found himself staring at an old photograph of them, him and Elena, on their honeymoon in Santorini. The joy on her face, the way she had looked at him back then, it was enough to break him. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over her name and his contacts. But what would he say? "I made a mistake? I miss you? Please come back?" None of those words felt like enough. So he said nothing. And the silence between them grew wider. An unexpected meeting. Months passed. Elena had begun to heal in small ways, through long walks, through late-night journaling, through learning to be okay with her own company. But the wound Ryan had left in her still ached. Then, one day, fate intervened. She was standing in line at a coffee shop when she heard his voice behind her. Low, familiar, laced with something heavier than before. "Elena." She turned, and there he was. Ryan, looking more tired, more hollow than she had ever seen him. His eyes, the ones she had once fallen in love with, were filled with regret. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You look good." Elena forced a small smile. "I'm doing okay." "That's good," he said softly, and then, more hesitant, I've missed you." She swallowed hard. She had dreamt of this moment, imagined what she would say if she ever saw him again. But standing here, looking at him now, all those rehearsed words faded. "I don't know if I should say the same," she admitted honestly, "because missing you, it still hurts." Ryan nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "I was an idiot," he said. "I took us for granted. I made mistakes that I can never undo." Elena's throat tightened. "Yes, you did." They stood there, two people bound by love and pain, both uncertain of where they stood now. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. Could we, I don't know, talk sometime? Really talk? Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to run, to protect the fragile peace she had finally built for herself, but another part of her, one she hated to admit, still cared, still wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something left worth saving. She exhaled. I don't know, Ryan. Maybe, but not today. Ryan nodded as if he had expected that. Take your time. And with that, they parted ways again. But this time, for the first time in months, the silence between them didn't feel so permanent. Love, redemption, and letting go. Elena had spent years believing that time could heal anything, that pain, no matter how deep, would fade into distant memory if given enough distance. But seeing Ryan again had reopened wounds she thought had long since closed. It wasn't just the past she saw in his eyes. It was the life they could have had, the love they had lost, and the memories they had tried to bury. For days after their unexpected encounter, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished between them. She debated calling him, texting him, anything that would ease the weight sitting in her chest. But every time she picked up the phone, she hesitated. What was she expecting? An apology wouldn't change the past. His regret wouldn't erase the pain. Still, the part of her that had once loved him, perhaps the part of her that still did, ached for closure. A second meeting, a deeper conversation. It was a cool autumn afternoon when fate decided to intervene once again. Elena had just stepped out of a bookstore when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Elena. She turned, heart pounding, and found herself face to face with Ryan once more. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable, but there was something vulnerable about the way he looked at her. I was hoping I'd see you again, he admitted. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. I've been thinking about our last conversation. Me too, he said. There's so much I never said to you. Things I should have told you a long time ago. Elena exhaled, looking up at the sky as if searching for answers. Then say them now. Ryan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. I destroyed us, Elena. I took you for granted. I let my selfishness get in the way of something that should have lasted forever. I thought I could have it all, our love and my distractions. But all I did was push away the only person who ever truly mattered to me. Elena closed her eyes briefly, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. Why now, Ryan? Why after all this time? Because I see it now, he admitted. I see what I lost, and it haunts me every single day. She stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, longing, and something dangerously close to hope. And what do you want from me? She whispered. Ryan took a deep breath. A chance to make things right. Can love be rebuilt? Elena wasn't naive. She knew love wasn't as simple as saying, I'm sorry. But she also knew that some loves never truly faded. They just lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to spark again. They met a few more times after that, having conversations they should have had years ago. They didn't rush, didn't force anything. Instead, they unraveled their past piece by piece, slowly finding their way back to each other. But the more they talked, the more Elena realized something. She wasn't the same woman who had once given her heart so easily, and Ryan wasn't the same man who had broken it. One night, after hours of conversation at a quiet cafe, Ryan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Do you think we could ever go back?" Elena looked down at their intertwined fingers, remembering the way his touch used to feel like home. "No," she admitted softly. "We can't go back, but maybe we can move forward." The hardest decision. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the possibility of something new began to bloom between them. They weren't the same people who had fallen in love all those years ago, but maybe that was a good thing. Then, one evening, Ryan showed up at her door, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Elena, I need to know, do you think we have a future together?" She hesitated, knowing her answer would change everything. "Ryan," she whispered, "I'll always love you. But love isn't enough on its own." His shoulders sagged slightly, as if bracing himself for what he already knew was coming. "I don't think I can go back to who I was before," she continued. "And I don't know if we can build something new without the weight of the past hanging over us." Ryan inhaled sharply, nodding. "So this is it then?" A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it. "This is us choosing to finally let go." He reached for her, pulling her into a tight embrace, and for a moment, they simply held each other, grieving for what was and what could have been. "You deserve happiness, Elena," he murmured, "even if it's not with me." "And so do you," she replied. "Find it, Ryan." The final goodbye. As Ryan walked away, Elena stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared into the night. This time, the goodbye was different. It wasn't filled with bitterness or regret. It was filled with peace. She had loved him, and in a way, she always would. But sometimes, love meant knowing when to walk away. As she closed the door behind her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. And this time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a new beginning.